Welcome. I'm Paige Fortna. I'm the director of the Arnold A. Saltzman Institute for War and Peace Studies here at SIWPS and the Harold Brown Professor of U.S. Foreign and National Security Policy in the Department of Political Science, also here at Columbia. On behalf of the Saltzman Institute and our co-sponsors for this event, SIWPS's Institute of Global Politics, Columbia's Institute for Social and Economic Research and Policy, or ISERP, and the Public Interest Declassification Board, also referred to as the PIDB. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Columbia for today's conference titled The Dark State, ? Government Secrecy and American Democracy. This is the second annual conference in honor of our late colleague and friend, Robert Jervis. I think Bob would have been at least slightly, maybe very, embarrassed to have a big annual conference named after him. All of us who knew him know that he was unaccountably modest. I can't think of any scholar with a larger ratio of impact on our field to ego. But while he might have been embarrassed to have his name at the head of the program, I'm pretty sure he would have been amused that the students have started referring to the conference as JervFest. And I know for certain that he would have loved today's topic. Issues of intelligence, secrecy, classification and declassification, and their implications for our country and for security are among the many, many topics that Bob's work has helped us to understand. The issues we'll be discussing today are particularly urgent in the current political climate, including the political climate here on this campus. Like many faculty and students and staff, I was shocked and outraged by the university's decision to call in the NYPD to arrest over 100 students yesterday. I want to apologize to our non-Columbia guests today for the inconvenience caused in getting into the building, and I'm frankly a little bit ashamed to be part of a university that responds to peaceful student protest by locking down campus and calling in the cops. Bob would have been dismayed by the escalation and the strategic miscalculation it represents. He, after all, did teach us a thing or two about escalation and the spiral model. I also know that he would have been very worried about the risk of an even more serious spiral of escalation and miscalculation between Israel and Iran. And I know that I am not alone in this room in wishing that Bob were here to discuss deterrence and spiral models in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and even here on campus politics. I also know I'm not alone in wishing that he were here with us today to talk about government secrecy, transparency, and accountability. I'd like to thank the members of the Jervis family who are present here today. I'd like to thank Ingrid Gerstmann and Olivia Grinberg and the fantastic staff at the Saltzman Institute, as well as the staff of IGP for helping us to organize today's events. Any of you who have put on a conference like this know how much goes into it. I'd also like to thank Peter Clement and Jack Snyder of the Saltzman Institute for helping us to craft this program, and especially to thank Matt Connolly, professor of history, who along with Carter Burwell, who I'll introduce a little bit later, suggested today's topic and helped us to connect with our superb guests and group of experts today. I finally want to affirm that a core value of Columbia, recent events notwithstanding, is the free and respectful exchange of ideas, even on controversial topics. And some of today's topics may be controversial. In fact, if they're not, we're probably not doing our job. To that end, we've built into the program plenty of time for questions and comments from the audience on each of the panels. And now I'm pleased to introduce Karen Yarhimilo, Dean of SIWPS and the Adlai E. Stevenson Professor of International Relations in the Department of Political Science, and former director of the Saltzman Institute, and a very dear friend. I think one of my biggest contributions to Columbia has been bringing Karen here from a certain school in New Jersey that I shan't name. Besides being an amazing dean, Karen is a renowned scholar of international security, crisis decision-making, and political psychology. She's the author of 2 books, each of which are relevant in different ways to today's topic. Her books, Knowing the Adversary, Leaders, Intelligence, Organizations, and Assessment of Intentions in International Relations, is obvious from the title what its relevance is to today's topic, and Who Fights for Reputation, The Psychology of Leaders in International Conflict. She's somebody who's worked with the kinds of documents that we're going to be talking today and has a great deal of expertise. She was Bob's student, as well as his colleague. And Karen has been the vital force behind the creation and the continuation of the annual Robert Jervis Conference, i.e. JervFest, and she'll tell you more about it. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Paige, for this kind and introduction and for great remarks as always. What an event you and your team and everybody here of the Institute of Politics, the Saltzman Institute of War and Peace, working together to put this wonderful program today. I know that we can look forward to several fascinating discussions, and we have really great panelists with us today. We're really lucky to have you, so thank you so much for coming. And again, apologies for for how difficult it was to get into campus today. I give a speech at this podium almost every week these days, sometimes twice a week. But today's event feels different than most. As you know, this is our second conference honoring the late Robert Jervis, my friend, my mentor, someone who had Bob as a mentor. Being here is important to me on a very personal level, more than I can explain. When we inaugurated the conference last year, I observed that Bob was a legend in the field of international relations, a true intellectual, a scholar, a mentor to many in our community. He inspired me, inspired so many of us in this room and who are watching the live stream to be political scientists, to engage with the world as political scientists, to really bring our scholarship to address, to make sense of real-world problems and help offer solutions, analyze them in creative ways. And last year, when we had the inaugural conference, we covered so many areas, geopolitics in China, issues around China, and models, talking about theory around deterrence and escalation and all of this. But there was one topic that we did not cover last year that I knew was also very, very important, and that is the work that he did with the intelligence community and his scholarship about intelligence failure and his passion and interest in declassification of documents. So I am so thrilled that we've had this opportunity to cover those topics today. And indeed, the topic of today's conference could not be more perfect. Bob worked with classified and declassified information for much of his career. As a long-standing member of the and former chair of the CIA's Historical Review Panel, he worked tirelessly to declassify intelligence and push back against excessive government secrecy. We know from our colleague Peter Clement, and we also know from Avril Haines' remarks last year that Bob and his scholarship were particularly influential on the CIA. Bob's writings were used as textbooks to train generations of CIA analysts. We know that information flowed in the other direction as well, with Bob gleaning insights from declassified intelligence for the benefit of scholars and the general public alike. I personally benefited enormously from his writing on intelligence and intelligence failures. And in my classes, in all my classes, I assign the postmortem that he wrote on the Iraq WMDs and the postmortem on the fall of the Shah. And it is just remarkable how his insights from those, writings, those postmortems are so relevant to understanding even the most recent major intelligence failure of October 7. You just go back to those writings and you glean so much that makes sense in explaining the recent one as well. In a broad sense, Bob cared about these topics because of their relation to effective democratic governance. He wrote eloquently that secrecy makes large parts of our government dangerous to democracy and difficult to control. But accessing declassified documents was also essential to his scholarship and to the legions of academics who would follow him. Without seeing the original documents and analyzing the actual minutes of closed-door meetings, we could not find the patterns that would otherwise stay hidden. We would lack that contextual analysis and level of detail that case studies in political science require. And we cannot analyze the psychology of leaders or decision-making without having access to those primary documents and declassifying information. I remember so many conversations with Bob about a variety of topics, but I vividly remember probably the best conversations we've had were when I came back from presidential archives and I showed him what I was able to find. And those conversations, looking at the documents with him, his eyes lit up. He could talk about them and with so much passion and curiosity. And I will never forget the time that I told him that I was able to get Brzezinski's weekly reports to Carter. And that the best part about them was that Carter not just read those reports, but he left his handwritten notes on the margin. And for Bob, that was just the best part of what we could find and what we could do, because from that came my first book. And I even relied on this in my second book, and other scholars have done the same. This is essential to the work that we do. It's essential to the work that he did as well. Also, we're going to see that one of today's panels will look at artificial intelligence and the management of dangerous information. And as someone who was always, I personally was always interested in it, but Bob too. I remember many conversations that we've had about what would it look like to declassify intelligence when you have other, forms of technology that leaders use to communicate and so on, and what would be the potential for AI to assist maybe in better managing state secrets. Those are conversations about AI we never really got to have with Bob, and of course, I wish we could. But Bob was often fascinated by new technologies, and I know that he was curious about the process, opportunities, and challenges posed by cyber capabilities and other forms of technologies. And I really often wonder what he would make of today's revolutionary age. And I know that he would be mindful of the potential use of AI in threat assessment and concern, probably about its use in speeding up political and military decision-making. Those are topics that we have to study. What are the effects of AI in warfare on political decision-making? This is just one example that I think we as a community should study, and bringing the kind of the Jervasian aspect, the Jervasian way of thinking about the world and decision-making into those conversations as well. I also think Bob would have been intrigued by the potential uses of AI as a tool of scholarship for analyzing and sifting through reams of data, and an area that most of us are just starting to figure out. And that really gets us to kind of how we do the work as scholars. Is there a better way to analyze thousands and thousands of documents? Can we use AI as scholars to do better analysis of decision-making and intelligence output and so on? So all of those are great topics for conversations. And today's discussion on government secrecy in American democracies would definitely be right in Robert Jervis' wheelhouse. But gathering as we do today also reflects his spirit. When we convene scholars and bring them together with members of the intelligence community, we implicitly honor Bob and the work and the values that he championed. He has always been about bringing the scholarly community and the policymakers and the intelligence community together. Always talked about it, about what would be the most impactful scholarship one could do. Well, one that, policymakers can actually access and draw from. And as I said, I think that Bob would have been intrigued by a lot of the conversation we're going to have today. And I cannot believe it's been 2 years. since Bob passing. And we've seen some major events in the world, in the international stage, as Paige mentioned. I've taken part in many big conversations since then, especially in the recent months. And every so often, I find myself can't help to think about how he would have enjoyed a particular discussion, but also how much he would have contributed to that conversation. I just always get a sense leaving a room, it's like, the conversation was great, but it wasn't a Bob Jervis kind of great. Again, I want to really thank the Saltzman Institute and the Institute of Global Politics for putting this conference together. And as a dean, it's wonderful for me to see how the Saltzman Institute, that is my first home, and the IGP, that became my second home, work together so closely on addressing those topics. And thank you especially, Paige, for your wonderful leadership as your first year director, and I look forward to working together next year. A special thanks to our colleague, Matthew Connolly, Professor of History, for bringing this topic to our attention and for helping us to connect with some of our outstanding panelists. Matt and I talked about this last year. I told him immediately, let's do it, and here we are today. A lot of work was put into this, and I really want to thank the staff of the Saltzman Institute, Ingrid, Olivia, and others, and the staff of IGP, Christina, Lauren, and others, and the event team of SIPA for putting this together. Thank you very much. Look forward to a great conversation.